we got a lot of shit for making that. Kids in the hardcore scene thought it was too corporate or too mainstream, or thought we were trying to be on MTV. And it's just like, we're on tour, we're documenting it. And, it ended up becoming like a pretty important part of 90s hardcore.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, yes, last week's episode didn't have an intro or an outro in the AM because I fucked up the export before uploading. It should be fixed on all platforms, but Spotify seems to want to be a dick and isn't updating, so on Spotify it's just the interview without all the fluff around it, so I don't know. It's just a fucking deal. Strife formed in 91, signing on with Kline Records, who issued their debut album One Truth in 94, before signing on with one of the country's leading hardcore labels, Victory. You can tell Victory wrote this, but I just tweaked it a little bit, so here we go. In 97, they issued In This Defiance, a recording in which the band attempted to broaden their sound as it featured guest spots from members of such acclaimed non-core acts as Fear Factory, Sepultura, and the Deftones. But just when it seemed things were going good for the band, Strife announced their disbandment in early 98. Sporadic reunion concerts followed, as well as a collection of odds and ends, 99's Truth Through Defiance, and almost exact 2 years later, Strife decided to reform. I'm sure many of you bought the OG California Takeover back in the day. I did as well. But did you know that there's a new return of the California Takeover that was put out on Andrew's label War Records in 2021? So you should go check that out. I first heard about these guys on the Cinema Beer Nuts comp, which I've talked about on numerous episodes, and their video for Blistered blew my fucking mind. I immediately went out and got In This Defiance and absolutely loved that fucking CD. Luckily, Andrew runs the IG account, so I sent him a message, got him on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. The new California Takeover release, what's the new crowd like compared to the old, backlash from the One Truth DVD, Sepultura having an influence on In This Defiance, the video for Blistered, the change in sound, Angermeans, and a ton more. Check out his band Berthold City's new record, When Words Are Not Enough, on War Records, which just released recently, so go check that out. Other than that, if you're a realtor and you want some custom Instagram stickers, go check out drive80.com, drive80.com. It's just a way to kind of up your brand if you're doing a lot of stories and you're constantly saying things like open house or just sold or coming soon or things like that, which a lot of realtors do. So check it out, drive80.com, or you can email me at mike@drive80.com and we can discuss. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and definitely share this with anyone who loves some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. When I first reached out, you said you were doing a ton of interviews, and as I just mentioned, I really wanted to get you on because this whole podcast is about the late 90s, early 2000s scene and bands that were present at that time. Either they'd started in the early 90s and then went through the late 90s and then stopped, or they started like then and went through the 2000s. And so that's really why I want to talk about it. And because, like I said, you guys were a band that I loved, but you said you were doing a bunch of interviews recently. What's brought that on?
It's weird. I kind of feel like, I don't know. I think I did one and probably other people saw it and are like, oh, I'm going to get Andrew on my podcast. I have no idea, but it was like, I did one, then next thing I know, I did like four. And I think part of it was we released the return of the California Takeover, the new record. We released that on my label. So we did do some press behind that. My new band, Berthold City, we have a new record coming out. So again, I'm starting to do some interviews and podcasts about that. But I think it's one of those things, like I do somebody's podcast and somebody's like, oh, I need to get him for mine. Like I wasn't thinking about getting Andrew, but or whatever, or maybe I was and whatever, forgot. So I ended up doing a lot of interviews over the last 6 months for sure. Definitely more podcasts than I've maybe ever have done.
Yeah, there's always a reason there's like a pop where someone is being interviewed across the board, and that's usually something that's pretty recent and relevant to they're trying to promote.
Yeah.
So I was like, what are they? Because I knew about the California Takeover, and I knew that you guys did the show. Was it 2020, February 2020 or January 2020?
Yeah, it was about almost to the day.
So I didn't realize that actually was put out as a release.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Came out, I think, probably about October of last year. Yeah, it came out on vinyl and CD. I released it through my label, and it was a recording from the LA show as well, recorded by our good friend Aaron Bruno. He's in a band now called AWOL Nation, which is a really big band. He grew up in the hardcore scene, grew up in the same town as us, and his old band Insurgents actually played the original California Takeover show. So him and an engineer named Eric Stenman, they recorded it. I got to release it on my label. It was great. Pretty much all the versions that sold out through me. Maybe able to find it online, maybe through our distributor. Revelation distributes our label. You might be able to find some copies, but it did great. People were excited, and it was kind of a fun nod to the original record as well.
Is it the same, just the three of you guys, Snapcase, Strife, and Earth Crisis? Because I see that Be Well and Fixation and Vision, all these bands played, but you just kept it on the release, just the three original.
No, those bands are playing the shows in May, so those shows haven't happened.
Okay. I'm looking at the wrong date. My bad.
Yeah, so the shows in 2020, we had Magnitude. We played San Francisco and LA, and we had Magnitude as support for the three bands. San Francisco, my band Berthold City opened the show, and in LA, Hesitation Wounds opened the show. And then in May, we have three shows on the East Coast. I'm playing Buffalo, and that'll be One Step Closer and Be Well are opening. And then we have two shows in Philly, and one of them is Envision and Fixation, and the other is Ignite and Year of the Knife.
So I'm gonna take this back and go into like how you got in the scene and all that, and the beginning of Strife, and just kind of like the story of the early days and all that. But right where we are right now, I love it because of California Takeover was such a huge release like 20 years ago when it came out on Victory, and I remember getting that, and because I already knew of you guys, and I had heard of Snapcase, and I think I had Progression Through Unlearning. That was the
Yeah.
Okay, so I had that, and I'd heard of Earth Crisis, and then I heard like Firestorm, and I was like, this is fucking insane. So the energy at that time, obviously everyone's a lot younger, it's crazy, but it seems to me every time I watch any hardcore video on like Hate56, his YouTube channel, I feel like the energy's still there. So for you to remember the first time you guys played California Takeover and the second, like how do you describe how the energy felt both times?
Both were great. I think what was kind of unique about the California Takeover, the original one in the 90s, was it was pre-YouTube, right? The only way you were really experiencing a band in a live setting was going to the show or maybe trading VHS tapes with people across the country. So live records were a little more interesting because you couldn't just go to YouTube and put in any band's name and experience what they were like live, right? You could watch the video, and you could watch videos from around the world, and you could watch their first show, you could watch their last show. So it was kind of unique in that way at that time. Definitely, we recorded the original California Takeover in '96, and that was probably the peak of every band, all three bands, kind of the peak of 90s hardcore. And I wouldn't really say a peak of Victory Records because they did go on to release some much bigger bands after that. But, it was.
But you guys were like the ones who put that label on the map, really.
Yeah, definitely, I would say in the first half of Victory Records for sure. And then they kind of turned into a whole different beast, right? Yeah, so a show in '96 was all with Strife, Earth Crisis, and Snapcase. Of course, the energy is going to be insane, and the crowd reaction is going to be incredible. And those records are new, and some kids are there seeing. For Strife, we were somewhat basically the local band, but some people are seeing Earth Crisis for the first time or Snapcase for the first time. There was definitely like a crazy reaction. But then fast forward to 2020, and we do these shows, and first of all, they're much bigger, right? We're playing Terragram Ballroom, sold out super fast. We're playing a large venue in San Francisco, sold out super fast, and it's great because you're getting the generation of kids who, of course, has seen all three of us, and then you're getting a younger generation who may not have seen Strife or Earth Crisis or Snapcase, and it was an awesome return to form. All the bands did a great job. We had a great time hanging out together, and the crowd reaction was awesome. It couldn't have asked for we couldn't have asked for better shows. So we're really fortunate that, all these years later, people still care. Our music, our lyrics, our message, it's still relevant. People still want to come out and see our bands, live.
Was there like a young presence, like a
Of
younger
course.
in the?
Yeah. I mean, especially like we made a conscious decision too. It's like we want to shine some light on some new bands that obviously young kids will be stoked on, but also new bands that maybe an older Strife band would be into, or an older Earth Crisis fan. So like Magnitude was a perfect fit because they're playing 90s style hardcore and they're such a great band and they're super young kids. I think they were a great fit with the three of us. And yeah, there was a big age range, and yeah, it was great. I'm really looking forward to the shows in May.
I mean, another thing I'm thinking of too is the message that you guys are portraying back then, because this is like when hardcore's around in that time. This is like a lot of vegetarian and vegetarianism, straight edge. That was the big
Mhm.
message. So you got to figure at that point you have people showing up because you guys are like, we're here standing for this thing as three bands. And I don't really know where Snapcase stood in that whole thing, but I knew like I feel like you guys were pretty prominent in being like a straight edge band, and then like Earth Crisis definitely was a huge story about them being that way. So like the crowd showing up there, they're like, we're here for a movement, and this is where all I feel like the energy would have been positive, but also like super like intense. And nowadays it's nostalgic, but I don't know if that same movement energy shows up today.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a little yes and a little no. I mean, if you're into hardcore, you're gonna go see Strife, Earth Crisis, and Snapcase, whether you are vegetarian, whether you're straight edge or not, right? Like you're just into the music, and you were showing up to that show, right? Yeah. Now in 2020, when you go see those bands, yes, there's some nostalgia, but there's definitely people that have stayed straight edge through the 90s, right? Or people that are still vegetarian and still vegan. I in the end, yes, you want to support a movement, but I think really people go see bands because they like the songs. They want to hear the songs. They want to sing along to the songs. And it's not like people were meeting at our shows and then going out to directly out after to protest outside of the
Yeah.
factory farm or something. Like it wasn't like that.
I mean, because that was such a thing that surrounded like hardcore back then too. Was like it was very like for something. You know, if you go to a pop punk show, they were like about girls and shit.
Well, it was, and I think there was a lot more. There was no internet, right? So, like, if you wanted to share your ideas on veganism, for instance, you would bring literature to your merch booth. You'd print out flyers and booklets, and you'd get stuff from PETA, and maybe you'd have a video playing because that information could not be shared. There was no internet to share that. People weren't sharing it on their phones. It was different. So, like the word of mouth, and it could be veganism, it could be Krishna consciousness, it could be straight edge, like really spread person to person. So you would play a show, and you would have animal rights activists setting up booths and passing out information because that was your way to connect with somebody who might gain some knowledge from what you were sharing. Now, with the internet, you definitely see less of that.
What I mean at like at shows, you mean, or?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, so whereas you might have a little bit more of a cultural or educational hub at a hardcore show in the 90s, right? Because that was a place where you could get this information. Like now it's not as prevalent or necessary, right?
So I think that this is like a transition back to because this is the point where you guys start the band and everything like that, and how you guys came up with how you guys developed like what you wanted to say. So for you personally, what got you involved in the scene? Was it because you started playing in the band was then introduced you to the scene, or were you in the scene and then started the band?
No, I mean, yeah, definitely we were in a scene and started the band. I don't think people start a hardcore band without going to shows or stuff. For me, is I found punk and hardcore in the late '80s and started going to shows in 1990. Once you feel that energy of a live show, you're kind of hooked and you want to go to every show. And from there it comes from, you know what, like I want to be on stage. I want to play in a band. Like, I think it'd be so cool for me and my friends to start a band together. And that's what happened. Like, we were all friends that would travel and go to shows together. And at a certain point, we're like, hey, we want to do this too. There was no bands in the city where we were from. We grew up in Thousand Oaks, a small suburb north of Los Angeles, and there's no real bands from where we were from. So we're like, you know what, we want to start a band. We had a bunch of kids, our friends, who were getting into hardcore because that was our friend group. Like, it's like we started going to shows. We bring more friends into shows, like kids from our skate crew or whatever. We had a big group of friends, so we're like, you know what, we want to start a band. We want to put on shows. We want to do a zine. Like, yeah, definitely, it was like came from being a part of the scene and wanting to contribute in different ways.
Well, did you do it because musically you wanted to play in front of people, or I guess and it might be just sticking on this whole thing of like having a message and all, because that's really what that like you. From what I remember, you guys really having something to say back then. So if I'm like kind of like not digging into it, but I'm saying it, and you're like, well, it wasn't really like that. Like, just let me know. But it's like from what I saw from outside is that you guys showed up and like, we have something to say. And from my perspective, as outside perspective, is you guys getting started. Did you start because you're like, hey, let's write some songs because we're motivated by the shows around us? Or is it like we all kind of have this thing that we're all bought into? We want to tell people, so let's start a band, but utilize this as a platform to kind of educate people.
Nah, definitely it was more like when we started, it was like, oh, we want to play in a band. And it wasn't, I think as we started playing more, yes, we were all straight edge and we were a straight edge band from the get-go. But as we started playing more and kind of developing our sound and our style, the message got honed in. And Strife was a straight edge band. That being said, it's not like every song we sang was a straight edge song or a political song, even something with a message. It's like there's a wide range of lyrical topics. I think in a live setting, we definitely wanted to, speak about straight edge, but also speak about acceptance. And we were a straight edge band, but we weren't closed minded. And that was like an important part of our message was acceptance of other people and people with different backgrounds. And so I think we did have a message, but it definitely, I think our early goal was just like, oh, we want to play, like we love hardcore, like we want to start a band. And there was definitely bands from the 90s who probably started because they had a very specific message that they wanted to get out. And you were going to find that in most, if not all, of their lyrics. You're going to find it inside the liner notes of the layouts and stuff. And we were, I guess, a little more lighthearted.
I kind of felt that too. Like I felt like you guys had some like I said before, I mean, Earth Crisis, they were like, from what I saw, like in your face, like we're fucking talking about this. And there was like a
Yeah.
lot of like folklore surrounding them and these stories that came out about them and stuff. But like with you guys, I felt that was part of it, but you guys were also like really good fucking musicians too. To that, like when you guys start and develop the sound, like what was like the surrounding bands or things that influenced the sound that you guys came up with?
Well, we were pretty fortunate. Our drummer, Sid, he moved to Thousand Oaks from Riverside, and he had already played in a band. He was in this band called SDI. He was a really great drummer, but he knew how to play in a band. He was in a band. They played Spankies with Agnostic Front, and they played Fairmount Park in Riverside with Youth of Today, even. And they played with DI and Voodoo Glow Skull. So he knew what it took to kind of start a band, and he kind of had a little bit of direction and some contacts. So when we met him, it was great because he could really play. I was really like learning as we went along. Rick came from another band as well. He was in a band called Monster Club that was more like Misfit style punk, but he was straight edge and wanted to start a straight edge band. And, at that time, we started in 1990, and basically we all loved the New York hardcore bands and the youth crew bands like Youth Today, Bold, and Judge, and Gorilla Biscuits. We love Chain of Strength, a lot of the Revelation Record stuff. But what we were seeing is we got to see many of those bands, but our first time seeing them was probably their last time ever playing on the West Coast, right? So like we saw GB, then they broke up. We saw Judge, and then they broke up. We saw Chain of Strength a number of times. We got to play with them even, but then they broke up. So, and then we loved bands like Sick of It All and Killing Time and Vision, and really we wanted, and Chromags, and we wanted to take that sound. And it was like, this is the hardcore that we love, and all these bands are breaking up, and it's like we wanna be in a band like our favorite bands. And so that was kind of our direction. And then there were local bands, not local, but California bands that were at that time that were an influence as well. Like Outspoken was new. We got to see them like when they had their demo out, and that was a huge influence on us, or Inside Out, whatever, But again, like a lot of these bands were breaking up. Instead broke up, and Inside Out didn't last long after we got to see them a few times. And we saw in the 90s, as these youth crew bands and more straightforward hardcore bands started to break up, the music was kind of taking a new direction, and we loved it all. We were just fans of music. So we loved Youth of Today, but we loved Sam I Am and Jawbreaker, and we loved Born Against and Downcast or whatever, As we saw these hardcore kind of splintering into different directions, and with Quicksand and post-hardcore getting big, and then the more emo type bands getting popular, and then the more PC hardcore, we were like, no, we want to play straightforward, fast hardcore, like the bands that we loved. So that was kind of the goal, was to sound somewhere between Judge, Chromags, and Sick of It All, but have the stage presence of Chain of Strength or something.
Was there any bands, because I know sometimes a band will they're seeing that they're surrounded by, that they're plugged into, and if they are lucky enough to be in kind of a scene, because it's helpful to be encompassing and helps you with the fan base and all that. Sometimes you're surrounded with music that you're like, yes, I love what's around us. And then there's sometimes, my whole thing is like the early 2000s when things start kind of expanding and breaking in weird directions. There's some bands out there you're like, oh God, what the fuck is this? Like, did you guys have anything around you that helped influence your sound in a, well, like you said, like we see where this is going, we love this, and we want to take pieces of this, but we also see this shit, and we were like, we kind of want to be so fucking opposite of that. I know you kind of just said that, but like, was there a band in particular, you probably don't have to say who they are, but you're like, we saw this band and we're like, oh, fuck that. Like, we are actually going to write so opposite of that because we're so just like, ugh.
Nah, I mean, not really. Cause like I said, like we all loved music. So like we would be at a hardcore show at Spanky's, stage diving to Outspoken. And then we'd be at a PC show in Santa Barbara at the Red Barn. And it's like Heroin and Still Life and Struggle, right? Like totally different sides of the spectrum, but we still liked it. So it wasn't like, oh shit, we don't want to be a part of this. Like we were just doing something different. And I think the cool thing about the 90s was you could have a band like Strife share a bill with a band like Sam I Am or Avail or Struggle or whatever it was, and it was cool. Different sounds and different messages and different crowds, and that was fun. Like we did a lot of, I think a lot of our success as a band was that we didn't just play with hardcore bands, or we didn't just play with straight edge bands. Like we would tour a lot with like bands like Voodoo Glow Skulls, or we played with Dancehall Crashers, or we did a West Coast run with Incubus even, you know what I mean? And it was like, oh, wow. That's how you really, if you want hardcore to grow, it's like you got to get in front of new people, and then you got to blow their minds, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I know a lot of hardcore kids who, the first hardcore band they saw was Strife because we opened for Pennywise, or Strife because we played with Descendants, right? And that from then, they were into punk, and from then they're like, oh, but what is this? I want to know what this is. I want to learn about this, right? So that's really how hardcore will continue to grow. That's how you spread a message, not by playing to people who know your band and know what you're about.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. It's funny you said that too, because I do want to talk about Blistered, like that video, a little bit down the line, and that's how I found you guys, and I'll talk about that. But it totally goes to the point you're saying is that I saw that on the Cinema Beer Goggles,
Cinema Beer Nuts, yeah.
Cinema Beer Nuts, and I remember all the other bands were so different. You guys came in, and I'll talk about it later, and it was so different. But I was like, I gotta fucking know this band. So you're right, like because you guys did that, it did open up people's eyes to like a scene that I knew about, but I think you guys were the reason I got pulled into that, and then that brought me into wanting to listen to Snapcase. And I liked harder stuff back then too, but then this was this whole other area of harder and hardcore and shit that you guys were that band that got me into that.
And that was like the Cinema Beer Nuts was a pretty important for people that don't know, it was a CD compilation but also a VHS video compilation. I don't remember who was really on that, but I would guess it was like maybe like Pennywise and AFI, and there was probably some sort of ska band, right?
Oh, it's like less. I actually don't know. It's like Lunatics, Less Than Jake, Mustard Plug, Vandals, MXPX. So you see those names. It's not. It's so opposite of where you guys. Actually, there's really no other band on there except for maybe Link 80 that had a harder sound, but everything else was so much more digestible melodically, I
Yeah,
guess.
kind of pop punk or
Yeah.
ska or whatever. And that was cool. And you would see like members of all those bands were into hardcore or support our bands. Like I said, we played with Pennywise, or like we did these huge New Year's Eve shows in San Diego that were basically like that lineup. It was like Strife with Blink 182 and Guttermouth and Less Than Jake and or No Doubt. And but it worked. And that was what was so cool. I really liked the 90s scene because people weren't so jaded and just focused on one style. Mixed bills were huge, and people really appreciated that. People were open to all types of music. I'm starting to see that in the hardcore scene now, like bands really branching out, doing their own thing, doing interesting, unique things, and it really being accepted. So
What do you mean? Like, what do you mean by that?
well, just like modern hardcore, just bands being able to kind of break the mold a little bit and do their own thing, and younger, hardcore kids just being accepted and welcoming of a band doing something different.
Did you guys, when you would do that, because I felt like the hardcore scene was so encompassing, like this is ours, and certain scenes got, the scene itself, it's very jealous with a lot of rules, even though it's not supposed to have rules. Did you guys find that when you would play shows with bands that weren't in like the hardcore, the Victory Records style shit or like whatever, did any people give you guys shit for that?
Not really. Not really. I mean, I'm sure there's probably people that didn't understand it, right? But we were kind of always a band that kind of just did our own thing and didn't really care what people thought or said. Like you said, like you got into Strife and you were into the One Truth DVD or VHS or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We got a lot of shit for making that. And it's like,
Really?
yeah, like kids in the hardcore scene thought it was too corporate or too mainstream, or thought we were trying to be on MTV. And it's just like, it's just like, no, we're doing what we're on tour, we're documenting it. And it ended up becoming like a pretty important part of 90s hardcore, right? And again, that had to do with pre-YouTube, pre-internet and whatever. But like that spread around the world, and it's a great documentation of what 90s hardcore is. But we got a lot of shit for that. We would get and that was the thing. Like I think in the 90s, a lot of people were just trying to be politically correct, and there was a big anti-major label backlash, and kids, they would pick at bands for any decision. If a band was trying to get a guarantee so they could make sure they have enough money for gas to drive to the next town, they would complain about that, and they would publish a zine about it, or whatever.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you need to just not give a fuck what people are going to think about what you do and just do it. But there was like huge debates when Sick of It All signed to a major label, or that could be a kiss of death, like signing to a major label. Which now I feel like people don't care. They want to see their favorite bands succeed, and they want to see people being able to make a living doing something they love.
It's funny you brought the One Truth video because the DVD is when I got that. So I had got the Cinema Beer Nuts comp, and then I saw you guys, and then I bought your CD and absolutely loved it in this Defiance. And then it took me this rabbit hole, and then I eventually got the One Truth DVD later. And the thing I liked about that is because when I saw Blistered, which again I want to talk about, it was who is this band? This is like intimidating and scary, and I need to see I need more of this. And then I saw the One Truth DVD, and when there's like it's such a I don't know just juxtaposition is the right word, but it's you guys are intense on stage, you're showing the live show, the whole thing is just like fucking energy. And then you show you guys in the van and stuff and you're funny and like personable and like oh you like I was like, man, you can like hang out with these guys, and like Rick, who is so intimidating as a front as what he is as a front man. He's fucking hilarious, and I never would have seen that unless I got that DVD. So I actually liked you guys more after watching that.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, and I think that was kind of the thing is like, sure we're an aggressive band, sure we play heavy music, but we're normal kids. We're not trying to live like a tough guy fantasy or whatever. And that was kind of the cool thing is it's just like you got to see the band members for who they really were, right?
Yeah.
And I'm glad like that helped you connect because end of the day like I would say the average hardcore kid across the US is a little closer to like the nerdy skaters that we were than the macho tough guys some of these other bands are, right? So they could connect, they could relate, and also they could see like, hey, this band, yeah, they're big, but they're just like me. Maybe I could do that someday, right? Like there's nothing different about Rick than me. So maybe I could pick up a microphone and sing in a band and tour the country, right? Like, and I think that's kind of the cool thing as well. We're just normal kids like anyone else. And yeah, we put out records and but we're crammed in a van trying to make it city to city and play these shows. And those shows were some of the best shows we ever played. Like I'm really glad we got to document that because those shows were incredible.
Do you remember a point in time when you guys were playing a show? Because when a band starts off, they're figuring out their sound, they're figuring out their stage show. And this is could be such a hard question to answer, but do you remember like a moment where you're on stage and all of five of you like locked in for the first time, and it was just like maybe it wasn't the crowd, but the five of you on stage were like, oh, like stage wise, energy wise, sound wise, like we finally figured it out and it's happening. Like from this point on, it's stuck like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can I remember that moment?
Yeah, it's a
No.
hard thing to like be, but it's like maybe like around the time.
Yeah, but there is a time like as a band, we would always try to improve, right? So it's just like, we tried to get good gear, so we sounded good. So it's just like, we started out, we had Randalls and we had Randall amps and we had these little tuners, and then there was no noise gates. So I think once we ended up getting like these rack mount noise gates and Mesa Boogie amplifiers, and Sid always had good drum sets. So I think kind of figuring out like the best equipment for our sound was helpful. And then I think really like locking in with a band comes from just playing. The more you toured,
Yeah.
the tighter you got, and the better everyone was on stage together. And we kind of figured out the just the flow and the vibe and locking in with the entire band. But you only get that from really playing.
How soon when you guys started playing did you notice that your fan base was starting to really get big?
So we started in 1990, and when we first started, again, we were from a small suburb outside of LA. There wasn't really a scene where we were from. It was difficult to get on shows. We used whatever contacts we had. Like the first two shows we played, we booked ourselves. Sid had a contact at Spanky's Cafe in Riverside because he used to be from there, so we got on a couple shows that way. And I think what had happened was we'd play these shows, whether it was like Riverside or Long Beach or San Diego, and we would bring 3 carloads of kids from our town to the show. So all of a sudden we're rolling up with 20, 30 kids, right? And they're going off for our band, but they're also going off for every band. And then the promoters see that and the other bands see that and they go, oh, you know what? I'm going to put Strife on the show again
Yeah.
because they're going to bring these 30 kids that are going to go wild for every band. And that was like a really important part. And it's just like, yeah, I'm sure we sounded terrible at that time, but we had our group of friends and they were all going crazy, right? And so that was very helpful kind of building.
That's really smart. Did you guys have that idea?
But it wasn't like calculated. It was just like we had a big group of friends and they all wanted to go to shows. Like if we weren't at a show, we were like friggin' doing stage dives off of fences and onto mattresses. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, we can't wait to go to a show so we could do a stage, like a real stage dive, you know? Yeah, we just had a big group of friends. So it was really helpful. So we recorded a 7-inch for New Age Records and then a 7-inch for Indecision. And then we released 2 comp songs. And one was a song called Am I the Only One? That was on the It's for Life comp on Consequence Records out of New Jersey, and then Only the Strong, 1993 on Victory Records. And when we recorded those songs soon after, we did our first East Coast tour. And that's when we could really see we were connecting because we were on a whole different coast. You know, we were playing these awesome shows. Kids knew the words, and those 2 songs were like our biggest songs. So that was, I think those 2 songs we kind of locked in on the Strife sound, and those were the 2 songs that really connected on a larger level.
So when you guys are you do the 7 inches, you guys are touring, you put out One Truth, and then so things are growing. So I really want to jump forward to getting in this Defiance and getting on Victory. Well, continuing on Victory because you said the Only Strong 7-inch or
That was a compilation.
compilation,
So
yeah.
we did that in 93. That song, What Will Remain, kind of became the standout track for that comp. And the comp had great bands, Warzone, Snapcase, Resurrection, Bloodline, Something to Prove. It was a cool comp. But our track kind of became the standout. So at that point, you know, Tony calls us up and is like, hey, that comp did great. We want you to do a record. The comp came out in 93. One Truth comes out in 94. So we were quick, recorded a record, and then hit the ground running. And that was the thing that, again, other bands of our era weren't doing was they weren't touring as much as we were. So we would do 2 to 3 US tours a year. So we were constantly touring, constantly playing new cities or coming back to cities. And that's what really separated us from a lot of our contemporaries, right? So we toured on One Truth for about 2 years. We went to Europe for the first time. 96, we go to Europe with Sepultura and then come back and write and record In This Defiance.
So that record is definitely your biggest record, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, that's again. I mean, just from my own personal perspective, that's what opened my eyes up because of Blistered and all that. So there's a lot of marketing going behind that record, and then when you listen to it, when I got it, I was like, holy shit, this record is a fucking beast. When you guys put that out, like, how did the sound advance, or like, what did you see, like, the growth was there, and how that record became what it was?
Well, I think there's 2 things. One was like hardcore music was becoming heavier and more aggressive. So like we were growing the same way Earth Crisis. Like Earth Crisis, you see the change from All Out War to Firestorm, right, to Destroy the Machines. And we were influenced by that. Like, holy shit, this is getting heavier and heavier, like, and we loved it. So that was part of it. Hardcore music was just naturally progressing into heavier territory, and we loved that. But the second biggest thing was we just did a 30-date tour with Sepultura. We were on the Roots tour. We were heavily influenced by their sound and their style, and we wanted to kind of incorporate that into what we were doing as well. So that definitely pushed us to go even heavier.
Would you say there's a song from that tour from Sepultura that if you listen to In This Defiance, you can hear guitar wise or song wise like an influence from Sepultura?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's like Stand as One, for instance. There's like this drum tom part before the breakdown that I think is heavily influenced by Sepultura. I think the breakdown of Will to Die is heavily influenced by Sepultura. Overthrow, Igor from Sepultura plays drums on it, but that's like it has double bass, like it's definitely influenced by Sepultura. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't like we were trying to steal the riffs, but we wanted to incorporate just some different elements and textures and styles while still staying uniquely Strife, right? I think that was a huge impact on our sound.
It's
Absolutely.
amazing. It's amazing how how one tour, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things going into that, but something that can just cause the direction of a record to go in the direction it is, and it just becomes it's like a perfect storm,
Yeah,
for
for
that
sure.
time.
I think at the same time too is just like we were a little bit not I wouldn't say burnt out on hardcore, but we were like looking elsewhere for heavy music outside the hardcore scene. Like as things would get repetitive and you'd hear like a watered down version of You to Today like so many times or whatever, or like these bands trying to sound like Earth Crisis but can't keep their guitars in tune or whatever. Like we're like, yeah, we want heavy music, but we want like people who could play. So we got really into Sepultura and Fear Factory and Deftones and Tool and bands like that, which all were big influences as well. Just the musicianship and recordings and that kind of stuff. So and that's why on In This Defiance we were like we were branching out from hardcore a little bit, and we wanted to have these guests that from bands that maybe hardcore kids weren't listening to, like maybe they weren't listening to Sepultura or Deftones or Fear Factory. So that's why we had Igor on a track and Dino from Fear Factory on a track and Chino from Deftones. And it was like these bands, sure they're not hardcore, but they have this same energy. And I think I felt like our fans would like their music if they gave them a chance, and their fans would like our music if they gave it a chance, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was a big Deftones fan at the time too, so I could see where that would have, because I remember listening to whatever track he's singing background on. I was like, I think that's
Will the Die Young.
yeah. I was like, that sounds like Chino. And then I read the notes and I was like, oh shit, that fucking is him. So like when you guys do now we get to the Blistered video, like I'm sure you've probably talked about this like a ton in the interviews, but I'm just gonna ask anyway because I didn't hear the other interviews you did. So like with Blistered, what made you guys choose that to be the track for Cinema Beer Nuts? Or for the comp? Yeah, for the comp and the video.
Well, I think the whole Cinema Beer Nuts was just based on the video portion, right? So it was like whatever song you had the video for was going to be on the CD. Now, our drummer Sid picked Blister to be the track for the video, which looking back was a great idea. Like that breakdown is super memorable
Oh God, yeah.
and pretty unique at the time. He kind of had the concept for the video. Even we had a director we worked with, but Sid kind of had that concept of the warehouse and the track.
What was his, like, why did he choose that? Because it worked so well, and it's so funny because it's so opposite of you guys being such a live band with that whole like fan base going nuts, and it's you guys by yourselves with space around, like big space around you, in the middle, in this dark room where it's just light in the center and you don't know what's around you, but just the five of you going fucking off and the song. I mean, it worked so perfectly.
Yeah, it just kind of aligned. I think he got the idea kind of from there's a Pantera video that was kind of similar. I think that's kind of where
Oh yeah, walk or something like that.
I don't even remember, to be honest with you, but they had a kind of similar vibe on that video. We had done kind of a lifestyle video already. We did the One Truth documentary, so we wanted something that was more like actual music video style as opposed to just a live video. And it worked, and it was pretty stark and very memorable, and I think that definitely helped.
So my experience in watching it, I'm like 17 at the time or something. And the rest of the video is, like I said, it starts off, it's fucking, what is this, like MXPX, and no, so it starts off with like the Vandals, and then Mustard Plug and Ignite, and Ignite's like, okay, cool, it kind of gets a little harder, then it goes into the Queers and High Standard, Assorted Jelly Beans, and like Assorted Jelly Beans is right before yours. So visually, this is what I've led up to for like 15, 20 minutes. So this video starts, and it's got the gun and the bullets fall down, and then it breaks in, and he starts singing, he's screaming, and I remember like I think I've said it, but like I just like laughed. I was like, what the fuck is this? And then it does like the breakdown like all this way, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I was just drawn in, and then it does like the full breakdown. That whole thing's amazing. So that, and then you hear like that guitar, like the was that you? Was that your riff that you played?
Yeah.
I love that riff. I was just like, it was so perfect, and it's such a stupid minuscule thing, but like, what influenced that part? I just had to know.
Like the breakdown?
Just like that guitar riff. I mean, this is me kind of geeking out on that because that stood out to me. It's the breakdown, and there's, so when you hit, it's like everything hits, and then there's pause, and then so the breakdown is like dun, 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 and so it stops, but then all of a sudden this guitar thing comes in and nowhere and fills in this perfect space.
I don't know, to be honest with you. Like I know Sid, our drummer, kind of had that idea for the breakdown, but I don't really know where the idea of adding like the second riff came from. Like I don't really remember. Like it may have been something. I mean, could have been anything, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, could have been Sepultura for all. And I just don't remember where that idea of keeping like the rhythm of the breakdown with a second riff coming. But it could have been, again, it could have been we came off that Sepultura tour and that was like something we got.
I mean, it's like, it's almost like a singing part, like there's certain bands where you see them live and you watch the audience and
And
they'll,
they sing the riff, yeah.
yeah, they'll sing the riff, and it's like that is one of those things where it's almost like a line in a song, but again, it's such a minuscule thing, but it stands out so much to me because that's another part where I'm watching you guys and it breaks down. I'm sold on that, and then it really breaks down, and so it's like sectioned off where it kept selling me, and then it's like a close up on Rick and he's screaming, looking to the sky, and like all you guys are jumping and shit in slow motion, and then that riff comes in. I was like, oh, I'm fucking sold. Like I got to get this goddamn CD. It was so great.
Well, nice. Well, thanks Cinema Beer Nuts. Who put that out? Fearless? I don't know.
Hopeless.
Hopeless. I always confuse those two. Thank Hopeless for giving Strife a chance, putting us on there, and exposing a whole new generation of kids to hardcore, right?
Yeah, right. So like, so you mentioned how you wanted to kind of expand on the sound and not be just kind of replicating what else is going around you. And that seemed to me when Truth Through Defiance comes out, which is really just like a compilation of B-sides and some new
Yeah.
songs, right?
Mhm.
So how many new songs, well, newer songs that you were recorded were on that? Just Untitled, or were there a couple more?
Untitled was a track that we did for a movie soundtrack for a movie called God Money.
Oh,
So Untitled was on there, and then there's a song called Global Domination, which was a song that we recorded with some of the guys from Downset, and that was something. It wasn't even really like a song we wrote for a record. It was like I think our friend had like some studio time, was like, come down here, let's make something up. So we just kind of like took advantage of that and worked on that song. Then there's some demo versions and alternate recordings of some of the previous stuff from In This Defiance or One Truth.
so two questions there then. One, I'm going to talk about like the sound direction where it went to, but before that, why did you guys do a rarities or B-sides CD only after two full lengths?
Um, I don't know. I honestly, I think it had something to do with maybe trying to fulfill our contract or something.
Yeah.
Like, what I mean? Like, I think Earth Crisis did something similar at the time too. So I don't know if it was like a push from Victory, like, oh, let's get something else out. I don't really, to be honest, I don't really remember.
Because it seems to me like when sometimes a band does that, or like Newfound Glory has done a lot of, what the hell, they like, Jesus, covers albums. Like when bands do that, it's usually where they have to fulfill a certain amount, and they're like, you know what, we really don't want to give you the next thing,
Yeah.
so we're going to kind of do this.
Yeah. And it definitely may have been that.
I think it was just more, I'm thinking of that because of, you don't have to get into it because I know like Victory has this whole thing around it. So I don't know if it was like one of the things where you're like, yeah, we're at the end of that and we wanted to get out, so we did this thing. But at the same time, like Untitled, when I remember hearing that, you had said before how you wanted to change sound. So that song really is where it starts sounding. Definitely sounds very Deftones.
Yeah, absolutely.
So since you guys are going in that direction, sometimes a band they can live in this balance where they really want to go and where their fans like them to be. So if they live in that center point, they don't get too much backlash from that, and they can make a couple more albums like that. But when they tilt too far in the direction away from maybe what fans are asking for, it works kind of against them. So when you're changing your sound, and then that song Untitled seems like the way it's going, did that kind of, because I know you guys broke up soon after that, like did that change in direction work against you?
I, I don't think so. Untitled is a track that like a lot of people really, really love, like, and like very hardcore people love too. Like Scott Vogel, for instance, like he loves Untitled. I think it was definitely us branching out, and I think if we continued in that direction, it could have definitely worked, especially with the climate of music at that time and what was becoming popular, right? We recorded that with a producer named Bob Marlette, who he had mixed In This Defiance, and we liked working with him so much that we wanted to record more with him. We went to his studio and he produced that, and he came up with the little drum loop that's at the beginning, and he had some ideas for different microphones and stuff to Rick singing to kind of give him that different like whispery sound. And
Yeah.
but he was also like, he ended up recording like a lot of new metal bands later, like I think like Edema and stuff like that. But at that time he was working with like recording like Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath's like solo record. He was really into pushing us to kind of expand on our sound, and that song, it's definitely not traditional hardcore by any means, but it's still heavy, just in a different way.
Yeah. It could work against you sometimes, but it sounds like it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, here's the thing: like, hardcore kids are can be very close-minded. If it doesn't sound like One Truth, they're not gonna like it. There's hardcore kids that didn't like In This Defiance because it was a sellout record or whatever, right? Or it was too heavy, or it's trying to be metal, or whatever it is. You can't please
Yeah.
everyone. So I think it's important just to write a record that you're proud of. You might lose some fans along the way, but you also might gain some, right? But you're only going to get so far playing it safe and trying to cater to your fan base too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you have to find that, like, again, you have to find that balance. If you just write for your fans, you kind of become like a slave to writing things to them.
Yeah, you write the same record over and over.
Yeah, and you're like, well, we don't like this. The fans like, we like this. You're like, yeah, but and then you just burn out in that sense. So soon after this, I mean, you guys broke up. What year did you guys broke up? Like break up?
98.
So then, how does Angermeans come out in 2001? Or Spotify says that, so I don't know what.
Yeah, it did come out in 2001. So basically, the band breaks up. We kind of take a little break, and then me and Sid, our drummer, we start a new band that's actually called Angermeans. And originally, it's supposed to be just Sid and I, and we are going to write a record. We got a deal with Victory, and we were going to write a record. Sid was going to play drums. I was going to play all the instruments and sing, actually. So we start working on that, and then I kind of realized I didn't want to be the singer. We link up with Rick. Rick sings on the demo. Sounds awesome. His voice sounds better than ever. So he ends up being the singer, and we have different members. Franklin from Shelter and 108 is playing bass with us. We have a few different second guitar players. But then eventually, well, we start playing shows, and eventually, like, Franklin moves back to New York. So then Chad gets back in the band. So eventually we just kind of morph into the same band.
That's crazy.
So it's like the same guys playing in a different band. People just want to hear the
Yeah.
Strife stuff. So at a certain point we're like, well, it's all of us again. We may as well just do this. We wrote these songs. They're a bit different, but let's just whatever. We'll do it as Strife. So and that was the thing, is we had all these original songs as Angermeans. So we did a new record called Angermeans. That was a Strife record.
So like, but did you guys at this point though, you're not back on the road touring a lot, right?
When the record came out, no, but when the record came out, we did a full U.S. tour with The Business and Rise Against, and then we did a European tour as well to support the record. So we did do some touring behind that.
But it wasn't like enough to where you guys are like, hey, I know we broke up or took a break, but this is gonna ignite the fire for us to get back. It was kind of a, all right, that was cool. Let's go back to not being a band.
Yeah. I think I think all of us love playing music, but also realize it's very hard to make a sustainable living strictly from playing music, right? And that's just what it is. Like, you know what I mean? Like we chose to play hardcore music. Hardcore music is only going to get you so far, and that's cool. And so like we broke up originally in 98 because it started to feel more like a job and it lost the fun and the, kind of the passion that why we did it was kind of lost. So after time, we realized like, hey, we love playing music. We love hanging out with our friends. We're gonna play. We're gonna do it on our own terms, and we're gonna do things when we want to. And we're not gonna be a full time touring band, but we're gonna do shows. We're gonna do some tours, and we're gonna write a new record and travel around the world. But we're only going to do it as long as it's fun and as long as everyone wants to be there. I think it's smart because now the band gets together, we get along better than we ever have, and we play shows, we all have a great time, and then we go back to our regular lives as when we're done. And there's no pressure, there's no bullshit. Just like, oh cool, we're going to do this fun thing with the boys.
So I'm gonna start wrapping this up because I know you gotta bust out. But this was something I had heard around that too, because you guys put out In This Defiance, and all of a sudden it was where'd you guys go, and that seemed to be the dialogue that I heard, and then rumors come up and stuff, and I don't know if this ever came back to you, but there was like some rumors like, oh, they broke the edge, and now they don't want to play together. Did you ever hear about that?
I mean, Strife stopped being a straight edge band, absolutely, but Strife broke up way before that. So that was like unrelated. I think like I said, we were a full-time touring band, and it's hard. It's hard being on tour for 3 months straight and being away from your family and your friends and also having bills. It's just like real life gets in the way sometimes. And there was people that just didn't want to do it anymore. I think for us, it was just like we didn't want to keep the band going with a different lineup. We started it with our friends. We wanted to end it with our friends. And that was kind of the thing. After we broke up, members stopped being straight edge, but that didn't have anything to do with like the initial breakup.
I mean, had you ever heard that though, as like one of the folklore around you
Oh,
guys?
who knows? I mean, who knows? I don't really. There's all sorts of rumors. I don't.
I mean, again, this is me talking for 20 years ago. I mean, like obviously nowadays no one gives a flying fuck, but it's like kind of like what it was around that. All right, man. So really quick before we start wrapping up, I see that are you still a realtor now?
Yep.
Wherever
Uh-huh.
company? Do you ever find like when you have you run into people where you're selling them a home and they're like, "Holy shit, are you the fucking guy from Strife?" Have you gotten that?
Not exactly. No. I mean, I definitely work with a lot of people from the music industry or the hardcore scene. So like, I've sold a lot of people from the hardcore scene. I've sold them homes or straight edge kids, but it's not like, oh, I didn't know and you just happened to be helping me and now I know. You know what I mean? Like people know, like let's say there's a hardcore kid from Atlanta and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to move to LA." Someone might be like, "Oh, Andrew from Strife, he's a realtor now. Like you should link up with him." But not only am I a realtor, I'm very good at it. I work for one of the top brokerages in the U.S. It's not like people are just working with me because they want to say that Andrew from Strife sold my home. I'm good at what I do as well. I have definitely worked with a lot of people that know my band, but they usually that somehow comes to why they are working with me, or a referral from a friend or whatever it is, right?
That's awesome. And so before I ask the last two questions, why are you the one that's running the Instagram account? Like, did you just decide on your own, or like how'd that happen?
I think I just whatever. I probably started it, so no reason. I guess, but yeah,
I mean, I guess it makes kind of sense because if you're a realtor, you obviously know you're probably very good at self marketing because it's just you. I mean, obviously you have a team around, so it makes sense that you'd be the one that like I know this Instagram thing works.
yeah.
Let me
I,
keep it
I I
up.
think originally when we started Instagram, like Chad and I were running it, and then I don't know. Slowly, Chad stopped posting, so it's mostly just me. It's all just me, and I just think it's whatever. Whoever took the initiative or direction, if anyone wants to post or wants to log in, they're welcome to post as well. That's how it is.
Yeah, no, I love it. It worked out in my favor because I got to interview you, so I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
doing it. Well, cool, man. So I wanted to, I'm gonna wrap this up because I know you got a whole day ahead of you because it's only like 10:30 there. I wrapped up with two questions. One, actually, yeah. One, what would you like to plug? It could be about you. It could be about someone that you're friends with. It could be about both.
My other band, Berthold City, we got a new record coming out March 18th on my label War Records. It's called When Words Are Not Enough. Got a couple singles right now streaming on Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever. I think if you've never heard the band, give it a shot. You'll definitely, if you like Strife, you'll probably dig this. Although it's a bit different than Strife, you could hear a little of the Strife in the songwriting, and it's a really great record. Super proud of it. My other band, will World Be Free. We have a couple shows in March with Spiritual Cramp out here on the West Coast. So if you're around, come out to a show. We don't play too often. And then yeah, look for Strife on the return of the California Takeover East Coast in May with Earth Crisis and Snapcase.
I love that you still get to do all this stuff and you get to like have a full time. I mean, I work for myself too, so that's cool that you have that balance to do that
Yeah,
shit,
no, it's great.
that
I'm
outlet.
very, very fortunate.
Cool, man. All right, so last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
What scene ethics? I mean, I would say the greatest thing I learned from the hardcore scene is like the DIY mentality, like do it yourself. And I apply that into every facet of my life. I feel like you never have to wait on somebody to do it for you or tell you how to do it. Just, get out there, get your hands dirty, figure it out. You're never going to have all the answers. So just get out there and do what you want to do and figure it out along the way.